The girl in the red hoodie, Keanu Reeves, didn't plan to be in that alley. Had just finished visiting a friend at the hospital and was walking back to his car when he heard a sharp cry echoing between the buildings. It wasn't a loud cry, but something about it pierced through the city's usual noise. Like a needle through silence, stopped mid-step as breath caught in his chest. Cry came again, this time followed by hurried footsteps and a low voice saying something he couldn't quite make out. Keanu turned and walked fast toward the sound. Alley was narrow and dim. A single broken light flickered above a rusted dumpster, and in that dim light, he saw here a young girl in a red hoodie being dragged by a tall man in a dark coat. Feet scraped against the ground, and she struggled, but her voice was hoarse, like she had been screaming for a while. Keanu didn't ask questions. The man turned to Lada. Keanu's fist met his jaw with a force that made the man stumble back and dropped. The girl collapsed onto the cold concrete, crying and gasping for air. The man tried to recover, but Keanu was already in front of him. Fists clenched, eyes burning. "What are you doing?" he shouted. The man didn't answer. Instead, he ran vanished down the far end of the alley into the darkness. Keanu didn't chase him, turned to the girl, instead crouching beside her, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "You okay?" She flinched at first, then looked up at him, eyes wide and filled with tears. "Please, don't hurt me," she whispered. Keanu shook his head softly. No, you're safe now. I'm here to help." She tried to speak, but her lips trembled too much. Keanu took off his jacket and wrapped it around her. "What's your name?" Hesitated, then said softly, "Mia." Keanu looked around. They were alone now, the alley quiet again. Helped her to her feet slowly and guided her toward the street where the lights were brighter. He flagged down a taxi and climbed in with her. "Hospital," he told the driver. The driver didn't ask questions. At the hospital, the nurses rushed her inside. Keanu stayed in the waiting room for hours. His knuckles were bruised from the punch, but he didn't care. His thoughts kept returning to the fear in her eyes. "We had that man taken her. What was she doing in that alley?" When the doctor finally came out, he said, "She's safe now, just shaken and bruised. No serious injury. Yes, keeps asking for you." Keanu walked slowly into the room where Mia lay on the bed, covered in a thin blanket, her hands trembling as she clutched a small stuffed rabbit. When she saw him, she sat up quickly. "You came back." Keanu smiled gently. "I never left." Mia took a shaky breath and said he didn't think anyone would help. "He was taking me to Avani. Don't know where." Keanu sat beside her. "And Askedo, you know him?" Mia shook her head. "No, he said he was a friend of my mom, but I never saw him before. He grabbed me outside the train station." Keanu's jaw tightened. Ned had seen too many stories like this. Girls taken and never found, but not today. Not this girl. Leaned forward. "Mia, you're safe now. You are not going anywhere with anyone. You don't know." Mia nodded and whispered, "Think ya, we don't know who you are, but you saved me." Keanu didn't tell her who he wasted. Didn't matter. Not right now. The police came and took her statement. Keanu stayed beside her the whole time. Afterward, the officer pulled Keanu aside and said, "We've been watching that area. There's been a string of disappearances and girls must lie. Think you stopped something bigger than you know." Keanu nodded, but his eyes were already back on Maya. The officer continued, "You have any idea who that man was?" Keanu shook his head. "Nah, but if I see him again, you'll remember his face." That night, Keanu stayed at the hospital until Mia's aunt arrived. She ran into the room and hugged the girl tight, crying into her hair. Keanu stood in the corner quietly. Mia looked at him one last time and mouthed thank you, nodded and walked away, but he didn't forget her at her fascinate. Her fear at the man in the cove couldn't. Something about the way that man had looked at Mia before he ran, something dark and familiar. Keanu couldn't shake the feeling this wasn't over, and he wasn't going to walk away from Mia. Had stepped into that alley by accident. But no, was in the middle of something far deeper, and he wasn't going to stop until he found the truth. The van in the shadows. 2 days had passed since Keanu Reeves saved Mia from the alley, but the image of the man's face still haunted his mind. Those empty eyes, that smirk as he disappeared into the dark. Keanu couldn't forget. He didn't want to forget because something told him this wasn't just one girl, one moment. It was a part of something bigger. Spent the morning back at the same alley where it all began. Light above the dumpster flickered, as if remembering to. Looked around carefully. Found a torn thread caught on a rusty nail by the wall. It was black, same color as the man's coat. Keanu bagged it in a plastic sandwich bag from his pocket and walked around. The either was a camera above a small grocery store nearby. Walked in and asked to speak to the manager. "He sorry to bother you. I'm trying to help someone. I was here a couple Nights ago, when something bad happened in the Aledo, you have security footage. The manager hesitated, but after a moment nodded. He went to the back room and fast-forwarded the footage from that night. Keanu watched as he appeared on the screen running toward the Alathan, the man in the coat broad moving fast. With Mia in his grip, the angle was blurry, but there was something clear. A black van parked nearby it. Had no license plate on the front but a small sticker on the back window, a red skull. Keanu paused the frame and took a picture with his phone and left the store and drove to the nearest precinct. Met with Detective Ramos, an older woman with sharp eyes and no time for nonsense. She looked over the footage and the photo. You did the right thing bringing this, and she said that sticker. We've seen it before. Who think it's connected to a trafficking ring? Hire careful, Marthy, move fast and don't leave a trail. Keanu's voice was calm but firm. What are you doing about it? Ramos sighed. We're tracking the van, but it's not enough. We need someone on the inside. Keanu's jaw tightened. Then let me help. Ramos frowned. You are not a cop, you are a civil. Keanu leaned forward. I'm not asking to be a hero, I'm just saying you know what he looks like and I'm not afraid to find him. Ramos studied him, then finally said, fine, but you report everything. You see, you don't play cowboy. Keanu agreed. That night he sat alone in his apartment, scrolling through forums, searching the Red Skull symbol. Finally, he found something, a thread on an old site talking about an underground club, a place where girls disappeared, where silence was bought and sold. The Red Skull was their mark. Keanu followed the clues and ended up at an abandoned train depot 3 neighborhoods away. It looked deserted, but he saw fresh tire tracks in the dirt and graffiti on the wall. A Red Skull spray painted on the metal door. Didn't go in it yet. He took pictures and sent them to Ramos and waited in his truck watching the place from a distance. After 2 hours a black van pulled up, not the same one but similar, and the driver, Keanu's heart skipped. It was him, the man in the coat still wearing it. Some deadish got out of the van and unlocked the door. More men stepped out from inside and they led a girl down the stairs. Was young, barely 15, blindfold and fist clenched. Reached for his phone and called Ramos there. They're moving a girl right now, and backup said they were already on their way. Keanu couldn't wait, stepped out of the truck quietly and moved toward the side door, found an old loading ramp and climbed up inside. He could hear voice laughing Gingma playing softly, but under that a cry followed the sound through the shadows. His heartbeat steady, his breath slow. Then he saw them. The girl was tied to a chair. Men were laughing and the man in the coat stood just behind her. Keanu didn't hesitate. Moved like lightning. His foot slammed into the door. The crash startled the men. He turned, but Keanu was already in motion. His fist connected with the first man's face. The second reached for something. Keanu kicked it from his hand and shoved him into the wall. The man in the coat moved last. Wasn't surprised. It had just smelled you again. Keanu stepped forward and said, this ends now. They fought hard. Keanu took a hit to the side but didn't fall. Grabbed the man's coat and slammed him into the floor. Sirens echoed outside. Police stormed in within seconds. Keanu stepped back, hands raised. The girl cried out, please help. Meth officers secured the area and arrested all 3 men. Detective Ramos walked in and stared at Keanu. You said you wouldn't play cowboy. Keanu shrugged. He treed. The moved fast. Ramos shook her head but smiled slightly. You did good. The girl was rescued. Her name was April and she had been missing for 3 weeks. Her parents were called. Tears flowed like rivers when they held her again. Keanu stood in the corner watching quietly, just like Beffereno. Fanfareno named just relief. Later that night, Keanu walked through the city. I looked up at the stars, barely visible through the city lights. Didn't plan to get involved, but now he knew this was just the beginning, because if there was one van, there were more. If there was one girl, there were others. And if the Red Skull was real, it needed to be said, not just chased. The Red Skull connection. The city looked the same. People walked to work, carried coffee, laughed on sidewalks, but Keanu Reeves knew better now. Behind the ordinary, something darker was moving. Had seen it, touched it, and he wasn't going to stop until it was destroyed. After the warehouse rescued Detective Ramos gave him limited access to the case files, only what she could share. Legal. I read through every missing person report, every van sighting, every mention of the Red Skull. There was a pattern. The girls were taken from crowded place, train stations, bus stops, even school. Could test the kidnappers. Never left fingerprints, never used the same van twice, but always left a mark. Sometimes it was a sticker, other times graffiti, times nothing at all. But there was one link Keanu couldn't ignore. Every girl taken had visited a youth center in the city Called Lighthouse House, it was a safe space for teens, especially those who came from broken homes or were on the street. Keanu decided to visit didn't tell Remasnet, yet the building was simple brick walls, colorful murals, a banner above the door that read, "You are not alone." Inside he found a woman in her 50s, sorting cloth. As her name was Dana Cash, ran the place with donations and volunteers. Keanu introduced himself and asked gently, "Have you heard of the Red Skull?" Her hands stopped moving, her eyes changed. She nodded slowly. "Yesa. Few of our girls have mentioned it's say it's a gang. Others think it's a gumme, think it's worse. Have any of your girls gone missing?" Her voice cracked. "Three-list 2 weeks ago. Her name was Kaylakwia Kinch, loved to draw. One day she didn't come back. No one saw her. Lavino goodbye, just vanished." Keanu asked to see her room. Danica agreed. It was small but clean. A sketchbook sat on the pillow. Keanu opened it. Drawings were dark girls with no face, hands reaching from shadow, sand on the last page, a skull dripping like it was bleeding beneath it. The words seized through Kindness. Keanu stared at it for a long time. Then asked, "Did she have any close friends?" Danica nodded. "A girl named Zoe. She's still here, but she's scared, really scared." Keanu met Zoe that afternoon. She was 16, bright eyes filled with fear. She didn't trust easily, but when he sat with her and Sadie saved a girl tonight's a gosh. Looked up. Keanu nodded. "Yeso." Leaned in and whispered, "They follow us. They know when we walk along. They leave notes in our lockers with symbols. They say we're chosen, but no one ever comes back once they're talking." Keanu asked, "Where do they find you?" Zoe swallowed hard. "There's a man who pretends to be nice, gives you food, asks if you're okay. Then a week later you're gonna." Keanu showed her a photo of the man in the quotas. This him. Shook her head. "Nose. Older, bald, always wears a white scarf, and he smells like peppermint." Danica walked over quietly and said, "There's someone like Faith comes here sometimes to donate things. Always Paula to call him Mr. Elding." Keanu's mind sharpened. Ed asked where he lived. Danica wasn't sure, but Said mentioned once he volunteers at Grace Chapel on weekends. Keanu thanked her and left. Grace Chapel was quiet on Sundays. Keanu waited by the steps watching, and there he wasped, white scarf, a plastic bag in his hand filled with books. Mr. Eldon moved slowly, but his eyes were sharp, too sharp. Keanu followed him. After service, he to safe distancia walked 2 blocks, then turned into a basement cafe with no sign. Keanu waited 10 minutes, then entered. The place was dim. A few old men playing chess and man reading a newspaper, and Eldon sitting at a booth in the back. Keanu ordered coffee, then sat nearby. Listened. Eldon was talking softly on the phone. His words careful. "Next one is red-eyed, then we'll be there at 8." Keanu's blood ran cold. Stood and walked to Eldon's to breathe. Man looked up. A smile. "Quick, can I help you?" Keanu leaned in and said, "Yes, you can tell me what van and where." Eldon blinked on Seth and smiled again. "You're not police." Keanu didn't blink. "No, I'm worse." Eldon stood slowly and tried to leave, but Keanu grabbed his arm. Eldon hissed, "You don't know what you're doing." Keanu replied calmly, "You know enough." 2 men in the cafe stood up, bodyguards, but before they could move, Keanu showed the badge Ramos had given him for protection. Not real police, but enough to cause doubt. Men froze. Keanu whispered, "You're going to sit, you are going to talk, or you're going to bleed." Eldon saw Ramos arrive. 15 minutes later they arrested him without a fight, but Keanu knew he was just a handle, not the boss. At the shadow, Eldon refused to talk, but when they searched his house, they found maps, Photosnum, and one van location marked in Reedon. Abandoned parking garage at the city edge. Keanu looked at Ramos and said, "We go to night." Hesitated, then not dead, "But you stay close at this time. You don't go in Alana." That night they moved quietly for a Pfizer's to unmarked car. Keanu and Ramos in the lead parking garage was emptier, so it seemed than a noisier van engine turning off, lights dimming. They moved in fast. Guns raised. The van's back door was open. A girl sat inside, hands teed, crying softly. They rescued her within seconds, but the driver had fled. In the wall behind the van was another skull, dripping. Below it, written in white paint, was, "See the one who punches first, we're coming." Keanu read the words and whispered, "They know me now." The eyes in the crowd. KeanuReeves stood in the dim parking garage, staring at the message on the wall. "See the one who punches first, we're coming." The words were fresh, still wet, and spots painted. Just minutes before they arrived, Detective Ramos stepped beside him. Whoever wrote that they were watching probably still era. Keanu scanned the upper levels of the garage. Shadows stretched between concrete pillars. A camera blinked red in the corner. "Get them," Ramos said. She called in a tech to pull the footage immediately. Within the hour they had a grainy video. A man in a hoodie stepping out of the shadows after the van parked Hated the skull, and the words Hin walked away calm, like he had all the time in the world. But it was his build, his movement that made Keanu lean closer, recognized the same man. From the alley, the one who took my eye, he's still active, Keanu said Ramos. Agreed, and now it's personal rescued girl. That neither name was Jada 15, had been missing for 2 days. She clung to Ramos like a lifeline, but when she saw Keanu her eyes changed. You were the one man they talk about, one who fights. Nodded gentlish, whispered they talk about you, say you're a problem, say. They'll make you disappear. To Keanu sat beside Harry, you're safe knowing I'm not going anywhere. Jade gave him a necklace from her wrist, a thin string with a little wooden heart. They made me wear it, she said to Mark. Keanu took a careful eye. The string had a tiny tag burned with the number 47. Ramos took a photo. We've found tags like this before. Who think they're part of an auction system? They are branding them, numbering them. Keanu clenched his jaw, couldn't speak for a moment. They just nodded slowly and whispered. When this next day Keanu returned to Lighthouse House, met with Danica and Zoe again. He told him 3 more girls had gone missing from other shelters. Same Signs a man with gift soft voice always smiling. Keanu asked if they had ever seen the Red Skull in any specific place. Zo bit her lip and said there's a club downtown, it's not public, but some girls talked about it. They said it's where the skull guys hang out. I only get in with a coin, a red coin. Keanu had never heard of it, but Ramos found something buried in one of the Falesa photo from 3 years ago. A bust that almost happened Edbit fell through. An officer undercover had found a red coin, small metal engraved with a skull on one, city a number on the other. That officer was killed weeks later. Case said no answer. Keanu looked at the photo. The coin had the number 27. He held up Jade's string, number 47. Ramos whispered, 20 girls between the meef. We're right, then they're numbering them in order of capture. Keanu stood. We need a coinzo. Sadie think I can get one. Looked scared but determined that there's a girl I know older. Left the center a year ago, get pulled into something bad, but she came back once and warned Maysade to stay out of the red lights. Aid. She kept a coin for protection. Zo called her. Her name was Laylash. Agreed to meet Keanu in a coffee shop across the river. She wore dark glasses and a hood, her eyes tired, but when she spoke her voice was clear. He kept it because it reminds me of what I escaped. Shh. Pulled out a red coin, placed it on the tablet. Keanu picked it up. It was cold, heavy, number 38. He is scared. Can you tell me where the club is? Layla hesitated. You walk past it every day downtown near the old Metro Theater. There's a door between 2 walls with no sign. You knock 3 times and show the coin. They let you in. Keanu nodded. Thank yeah, but be careful. They don't just sell girls, they sell silencing. They kill for it. Night. Keanu went to the door. Ramos waited in a van nearby, listening through a wire. A knocked 3 times. The door slid open. Just a crack. A man stared through a coin key and held it up. The door opened. Inside was loud music, heard lights, people dancing. Lying bent behind the stage was a corridor. Dark. Wakaken walked calmly, his eyes sharp. Found a room with black curtains and thick carpets in the wall. Photos numbers crossed out. Some circled. Keanu took pictures quickly and saw screen live footage. A girl in a Kagesh was crying, wearing tag 49. He whispered into the mic, they are prepping another salu. Have minutes, not hours. Ramos said backup is on the way. Keanu moved fast, found a side room filled with keys and logs, grabbed the cage key and sprinted toward the hallway. He reached the door just as 2 guards blocked him. Didn't wait, his fists moved like thunder and hit the floor. The other reached for a tasser. Keanu kicked it away and knocked him out. Cold hope. And the Kajethi girl looked up in shock. You're real, she said. Lifted her gently. Let's get sirens in the distance. Ramos and her team stormed in. Girls were found, 6 in total, each with a red tag. Olivia Savid. The club was shut down, but the man from the alley, the man in the hoodie, was gone. Aganon step ahead. Keanu watched the news the next morning. Heroes praised club, exposed girls rescued. But one line stood out in the report. Police say the mastermind behind the trafficking network remains at large. Is believed to be watching, waiting, and targeting the man who stopped him. Keanu whispered to himself, let him come. The face behind the curtained city called KeanuReeves a hero, but he didn't feel like one. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the girls stare for their eyes, begging for someone to believe. The man in every shadow. He saw him, the man in the hoodie, the one who had started all this. The one still free. It had been 3 days since the club raid, and although it shut down a major part of the Red Skull operation, everyone knew it wasn't the And it was just the middle detective Ramos sat across from Keanu in her office papers. Scattered across the desk she looked tired with found hidden files. In the club's backroom transaction record snims, but all alias no real leds Keanu asked about. The girls we rescuedo, they remember anything Amos nodded slowly a few davi say. There's someone above everyone else Sethi call him the curtain man because he's never seenly heard he speaks through speakers always behind a curtain and decides which girl goes where. Keanu leaned forward. That's him, that's our guy. Ramos looked doubtful. Don't even know if he's real. Keanu stood up's real. I've seen what he does. Just need to draw him out. Ramos narrowed her eyes. And how do you plan to do that? Keanu thought for a long moment, then whispered to give him what he wants. Me's plan was dangerous. Would call it foolish, but Keanu knew it had to be Donethi. Created a fake identity, spread rumors in certain place, whispers of a girl being transported private. Telino police protection, just one man escorting her. Keanu and a girl named Kamish was 19 and Bravion of the rescued girls volunteered herself. Said if she could help stop this for good she would. Be practiced for days, trained for any outcome. Hidden wires backup team escape routes every step. Planeten, the night of the operation, they drove a decoy van through a quiet part of town. Known for past sightings, Keanu drove. Akami sat in the back with fake restraints. Palas followed from a distance but just out of sight. Everything was silent for the first Arthon. A black car pulled behind them. No plats. Keanu looked in the mirror and whispered, "We've got company." The car flashed its lights on Seth and Twisia signal. Keanu pulled over. As planned, two men stepped out, hoods up, guns out. Keanu got out slowly, hands raised. They spoke no words, just nodded toward the back of the Vanoni man. Opened it. Kami screamed on. Kuthi yanked her out. Keanu lunged but was knocked back. The injected Kami with something. She went limp to limp. Pramos's voice crackled in his ear. What's happening? Keanu tried to respond, but the men shoved him into the back seat of the black car. His comm was knocked off. The door slammed and the car sped away. Keanu was trapped. No backup, no signal. He didn't punish. Counted the turns, measured the time. They drove for 20 minutes, then stopped in front of an old theater with boarded up windows and a red curtain painted across the front. They pulled him out, blindfolded him, and dragged him inside. There smelled like mold, and old perfume was pushed onto a chair. The blindfold was ripped off. In front of him was a stage with a long velvet curtain. From behind it came a voice. Sift calmly caused us a lot of trouble. Keanu said nothing. The voice continued, "You think this is about girls and vans and coins? This is bigger deal in control and loyalty and silence." Keanu whispered, "You deal in fear and I'm not afraid of you." The voice chuckled, "Good, because the ones who aren't afraid are the most fun to break." The curtain began to rise, but slowly, too slow. Like Keanu scanned the room. For men in masks stood near. Biarmadredi distracted. His hands were bound, but loose. Lie remembered what Ramos said, "If you get close and a punch first, ask." Latterus. The curtain lifted. Keanu's eyes widened. There was no man, just a wall of screens, each showing different rooms, girls in caged, guards walking hallways, and one screen, a camera feed showing Kami strapped to a chair, still unconscious. The voice returned, "To you. See, you've only peeled back one layer. Are everywhere." Keanu stood. "You made one mistake." The voice asked, "What's that?" Keanu smiled. "You let me in." A lunged at the nearest guard, knocking him out with a headbutt, grabbed his arm and twisted the gun free. The room exploded in chaos. Keanu moved like a storm. Every punch, every shot, controlled in seconds. 3 guards were down. 4th ran. Alarms blared, but it was too late. Outside Eremos and a backup team stormed the building. I had traced the vans signal. They had followed the sound. They had come for him. Kami was rescued safe. Live screens were destroyed. The recordings sized. Keanu stood in the center of the room, breathing hard. Behind the last curtain they found a throne empty, but with one thing resting on the Seattle mask, plain expressions, a red skull on the forehead. Ramos picked it up. "This isn't over." Keanu nodded, "But we just ripped the curtain down and now they know we're not afraid." Asterisk. The quiet before the storm. News spread fast. Red Skull hideout had been raided. Girls rescued, guards arrested. Footage recovered, but there was no final channel leader, no namenly. The mask left behind, a white mask with a red skull placed neatly on a throne, like someone had planned to vanish. Detective Ramos paced the precinct floor, flipping through pages and screenshots. The erased most of their network, burned accounts, wiped device, but not everything. In a hidden server room beneath the theater they found one file the hackers couldn't delete. A list of 20 names, girls marked with numbers from 28 to 48. Own name Had a red circle around it. Keanu Reeves stood beside Ramos staring at the screen. They wanted her back. This was personal now, but Cammy was safe and she wasn't. Afraid she'd gone back to the lighthouse house shelter volunteering, helping others heal. Keanu visited her times, bringing books times just to sit and listen. Saw how the others looked at her now like she was a light, but the shadows weren't. Donnie and night. Keanu's phone rang. It was a private number. He answered quietly. No one spoke, but in the background he heard something. A song faint played on an old music box, saying one Jade had hummed. When they rescued her, the voice came next. Deep Camus punched first, but we're still standing. Hung up without waiting and rushed to Ramos. They tracked the call to a hotel outside the city. By the time they arrived, the room was empty, but on the bed was a photo not of Keenan, not of Cam, but of Zoe, the girl who had given them the coinzo. Had vanished from Lighthouse House 2 nights earlier. They thought she had gone to visit her sister. Hadn't. Storm was back. Red Skull hadn't. Just gone quiet. Moved deeper. Dark. Kirkin sat in a empty hotel room staring at the photo of Zoe. Her smile froze in that moment. A message on the back: bring the coin. Come. Alana. He knew it was a trap, but he also knew he had no choice. He met Ramos outside the building. Said, we can trace your wire. Well, follow at a distance, but you can't lose signal. Keanu nodded and whispered, this ends tonight. Entered the new location, an old museum under renovation. Dark halls covered exhibits. Cameras in the corners. A woman's voice echoed, you never should have gotten involved. Keanu followed it past by broken statues and roped off rooms until he reached the center. A circle of chair sand in the middle. Zohan's teed eyes full of fire saw Keanu and whispered there. Hurrah stepped forward, but a curtain dropped behind him, trapping them inside. For masked figures stepped out from the dark, each with red skulls on their masked. Woman removed hers. It was Lele, the same girl who gave him the coin. Keanu stared in disbelief. You were one of them. Layla nodded slowly. It was theirs, but I never left. He brought you the coin because they told me to. Wanted you to come. Keanu's fists clenched with base. You made noise. You punched first. You made us weak, but tonight you'll make us strong again. Keanu moved faster, ripped a rope from the chair and knocked one guard down, tackled another, and grabbed a taser. Fought through the others until he reached Zoe and cut her free. Picked up a piece of broken wood and stood beside him. Together they faced the last. Layla stepped back. This wasn't the planche. Whispered is not supposed to win, but Keanu whispered backy, don't fight to weenie, fight to end it. Sirens filled the Ramos and her team had traced the signal. Officers flooded in. Red lights blinked. The Red Skull figures dropped their weapons. Layla tried to run, but Zoe stopped her, knocked her to the ground and said, you lied to us. I wore our pain like a costume. The rest was quiet. Keanu stood in the museum lobby breathing slowly. Zoe leaned against him. They got scared. They went to Farron. No, their broken. Ramos approached. Traced the final server. The real curtain man found him wasn't behind a curtain, was behind a badge. A high-ranking official. Simeon inside. A Simeon who used power to protect the system was arrested. The next morning, no mask, no costume, just a name and a face. Didn't deny, just smiled and said, there will always be shadows, but Keanu replied quietly, there will always be light. 2 weeks later, the city honored the survivor. Scammy Jade, Zoe and others who never gave up. The Red Skull operation was destroyed. Its roots burned. Keanu stood in the back of the room during the ceremony, watching, not for danger but for healing. Zoe took the stagger, voice strong. We're marked, numbered it now. Write our own names after the ceremony. Found Keanu outside here. You finally going to rest? Smiled softly. Maybe a bit. If I see anyone dragged into darkness again, he'll still punch first and ask later.